The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the thin fabric of her coat, a coat she'd found in a charity bin 3 days ago, and settled deep in her bones. Elara shivered, drawing her knees tighter to her chest. The bench was unforgiving, its metal slats pressing hard lines into her skin. Each gust of wind that swept through the cavernous bus station felt like a physical blow, a reminder of how utterly exposed she was. Everything was gone. The apartment, the job, the sliver of hope she had carefully nurtured for years. All of it erased by one man. Marcus. His name was a bitter taste in her mouth, a phantom ache behind her ribs. He hadn't just left. He had dismantled her life with surgical precision, leaving nothing but rubble and the crushing weight of shame. He'd called her worthless, stupid, a charity case nobody would ever want. Huddled on the bench with the smell of diesel fumes and stale disinfectant filling the air, she felt the truth of his words settle over her like a shroud. Her stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. Hunger was a constant companion now, a dull roar that had long since replaced the tears. She had cried until she was empty, until her eyes were raw and her throat was scraped sore. Now, there was just this, a hollow space where a life used to be, a woman who was a ghost in her own story. She watched the few other late-night travelers, people with destinations, with tickets clutched in their hands. They had somewhere to go, someone to meet. She had nowhere, and no one. Her reflection in the grimy window was a stranger's face, gaunt, pale, with eyes that looked 1,000 years old. She closed them, trying to retreat into the darkness behind her eyelids. But even there was no peace, only the echo of his voice, the memory of a slammed door, and the chilling finality of being utterly, terrifyingly alone. This was it. This was her rock-bottom moment. A cold, hard floor she had finally hit after a long, bruising fall. She didn't know how to get back up. She wasn't even sure she wanted to. Julian Vance hated detours. His life was a study in efficiency, a meticulously planned route from one objective to the next. Tonight, a sudden road closure had forced him off the freeway, shunting his sleek, silent car onto the city's forgotten arteries. It was late. He was tired, the numbers from the quarterly report still swimming behind his eyes. In the back seat, his daughter, Maya, was asleep, her small face serene in the soft glow of the streetlights. She was 6, and she was the center of his universe, the one variable for which he would derail any plan. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, a familiar ache tightening his chest. She looked so much like her mother. He pushed the thought away, a practiced, reflexive motion. Grief was a room. In his house, he kept locked. A red light brought him to a halt in front of a dingy 24-hour diner, its neon sign flickering weakly against the oppressive dark. Next to it was the bus station, a concrete monolith that seemed to exhale misery. And then he saw her, a woman huddled on a bench just outside the station's doors. She was a slip of a thing, practically swallowed by a coat that was too big for her. She was shivering, not just from the cold, but with a deep, systemic tremor that spoke of something far worse than a simple chill. Something about her posture, the way she seemed to be trying to fold into herself and disappear, snagged his attention. It was a posture he recognized, the posture of defeat. He had felt it himself, in the crushing silence of the hospital, in the empty house that followed. He did something he never did. He deviated from the plan. He pulled the car into the diner's nearly empty parking lot, the crunch of gravel loud in the quiet night. He unbuckled his seatbelt, his movements slow, deliberate. He shouldn't get involved. It wasn't his problem. He had his own burdens, his own children to protect. But he couldn't shake the image of her, so profoundly alone. He thought of his wife, of the cruel randomness of life, of the way a person could have everything one day and nothing the next. He opened his door, the cool night air rushing in. He walked towards her, his expensive shoes silent on the cracked pavement. Elara didn't hear him approach. She was lost in a fog of cold and exhaustion. A shadow falling over her was the first sign she wasn't alone. She flinched, her body tensing, ready for a threat. She looked up into the kindest eyes she had ever seen. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, a stark contrast to the grit and grime of her surroundings. He was handsome, but it was the gentleness in his expression that held her. There was no pity in his gaze, only a quiet, somber understanding. He didn't speak for a moment, simply held her gaze. Then, his voice, low and calm, cut through the silence. "Are you all right?" The simple question undid her. No one had asked her that in so long. No one had cared enough to ask. She couldn't find her voice. She could only shake her head, a small, jerky movement. He didn't press. He just nodded, as if she had given him a complete and thorough answer. "I was about to get some coffee," he said, gesturing to the diner. "Please, let me buy you a hot meal. It's cold out here." Her mind screamed warnings. Don't trust him. Men don't offer kindness for free. But her body, weak with hunger and cold, betrayed her. The thought of a hot meal, of a warm place to sit for just a few minutes, was an irresistible siren song. She gave a hesitant, almost imperceptible nod. He offered her a hand. His touch was warm and firm. It wasn't threatening. It was steadying. As he helped her to her feet, her legs felt like they were made of string. She stumbled, and he caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist to support her. For a fleeting second, she felt safe. It was a feeling so foreign, so long forgotten, that it almost made her weep. He led her into the diner, the bell above the door chiming softly. The warmth inside was a shock, a thick, comforting blanket of air that smelled of coffee and fried food. He guided her to a booth in the corner, away from the few other patrons. She slid onto the vinyl seat, her hands trembling as she tucked them into her lap. He sat opposite her, shrugging off his suit jacket. "Order anything you want," he said gently. When the waitress came, Elara couldn't speak. She just pointed to the first thing she saw on the menu, a picture of soup and a sandwich. The man ordered a black coffee for himself. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't pry. He just sat there, allowing her the space to breathe. When the food came, she ate. She tried to be slow, to be polite, but the hunger was a wild animal inside her. She devoured the soup, the warm broth, a balm to her frozen insides. She ate the sandwich with a desperation that shamed her. He didn't watch her with judgment. He just sipped his coffee, his gaze directed out the window. He was giving her the dignity of not being observed in her moment of raw need. When she was finished, a measure of strength had returned to her. The fog in her brain had begun to clear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. He finally looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "My name is Julian." "Elara," she replied. "Elara," he repeated as if testing the name. "I can't leave you out there. It's not safe." Panic flared in her chest. "I can't pay you back. I don't have any money. I'm not asking you to, he said, his voice steady. I have a proposition, a job. It would be temporary, just until you get back on your feet. She stared at him, suspicious. What kind of job? My housekeeper recently quit. My home is large. I have 2 children. I need help. Live in, if you want it. Room and board and a salary. It would give you a place to stay. It sounded too good to be true. A trap. It had to be a trap. But then she looked at him, really looked at him. There was a weariness in his eyes, a sadness that seemed to mirror her own. This wasn't a predator. This was a man who was also, in his own way, just trying to keep his world from falling apart. And what was her alternative? The cold bench, the gnawing hunger, the slow, inevitable fade into nothing. Okay, she breathed, the word a puff of surrender. Yes, okay. He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. Come with me. He paid the bill and led her back out into the night. He walked her to his car, a machine so sleek and black it seemed to absorb the light around it. He opened the back door, and for the first time she saw the sleeping child. A little girl curled up under a soft blanket, her dark curls spilling over a pink pillow. The sight of her, so peaceful and innocent, extinguished the last of Elara's fear. This man was a father. He wouldn't bring a threat into his child's life. He wouldn't bring her home if he meant her harm. She slid into the front passenger seat. The leather was soft. The air inside was warm and clean. As he pulled out of the parking lot and onto the dark street, leaving the bus station and the diner behind, Elara felt a fragile, terrifying flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The house wasn't a house. It was a monument of glass and steel, perched on a hill overlooking the glittering city. As Julian drove them through the imposing gates and up a long, winding driveway, Elara felt smaller and smaller. This was a different world, a world she didn't belong in. He led her inside. The foyer was vast, with a ceiling that soared 2 stories high and a modern chandelier that looked like a frozen explosion of stars. The air was still and silent, the only sound the soft click of their shoes on the polished marble floor. It was beautiful, and it was sterile. It felt less like a home and more like a museum, a place where life was displayed but not truly lived. Maya's room is upstairs, Julian said quietly. I'll just get her to bed. He disappeared up a floating staircase with the sleeping girl in his arms, leaving Elara standing alone in the cavernous space. She felt like a stray dog brought in from the rain, dripping onto a priceless rug. Every instinct told her to run, to flee back to the anonymity of the streets where she at least understood the rules. When Julian returned, he found her exactly where he had left her, clutching the strap of her worn-out bag. The staff quarters are in a separate wing, he began, but for tonight, there's a guest room just down this hall. It's closer. He led her to a door and opened it. The room was larger than her entire old apartment. A king-sized bed with a crisp white duvet dominated the space. A wall of windows looked out over the city lights. The bathroom is through there, he said, pointing. There are fresh towels, and some... My wife's things are still in the closet. You might find something to wear. The mention of his wife hung in the air, thick with unspoken sorrow. Thank you, sir, she murmured, the word feeling inadequate. Julian, he corrected gently. My name is Julian. He hesitated at the door. Get some rest, Elara. We can talk more in the morning. Then he was gone, and she was alone with the silence and the luxury. She took a shower, the hot water a miracle against her skin. She washed away the grime of the last few days, watching the dirt swirl down the drain like a physical manifestation of her old life. She found a simple gray sweatsuit in the closet, soft and worn. It smelled faintly of lavender. She put it on, feeling a pang of guilt, of intrusion. She climbed into the bed. The sheets were cool and smooth, the mattress so soft it felt like sinking into a cloud. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she was warm. She was safe, and she wept. Not for what she had lost, but for this small, undeserved kindness. The next morning, she met the other child, Leo. He was 10, with his father's serious eyes and a distrustful frown that seemed permanently etched on his face. He stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching as Elara tried to figure out the complexities of a coffee machine that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "I'm Elara. I'm the new housekeeper." "The last one quit," he said, as if it were an accusation. "She said this house was too sad." Before she could respond, Maya padded into the room, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She stopped when she saw Elara hiding behind her brother's legs. Julian entered a moment later, already dressed in another perfect suit. "Good morning," he said, his voice a little strained. He looked at his children, then at Elara. "Kids, this is Elara. She'll be helping us out for a while." Leo just scowled. Maya remained silent, her wide, curious eyes fixed on Elara. The days that followed were a quiet routine of tentative trust. Elara learned the geography of the house, the rhythms of the family. She cleaned rooms that were already spotless. She prepared meals that were often eaten in silence. She kept her head down. She worked hard. She tried to be invisible. She chose not to stay in the formal staff quarters. They felt too far away, too isolated. Instead, she kept to the small guest room off the main hall. It was her sanctuary, the one place she felt she could breathe. She learned the children through observation. She noticed that Maya, who rarely spoke, loved to draw. She would sit for hours with a box of crayons, creating vibrant, imaginary worlds on paper. She noticed that Leo, for all his prickly defensiveness, meticulously cared for a small potted plant on his windowsill. One afternoon, she found him staring at it, his brow furrowed in frustration. A small toy soldier he used as a decoration had broken, its plastic arm snapped off. "I can fix that," she said softly, approaching him. He looked at her, suspicious. "How?" My dad used to build models. He taught me." She took the tiny soldier, and with a tube of superglue she found in a utility drawer, she carefully reattached the arm, holding it in place until the bond was set. She handed it back to him. He examined it, his critical gaze inspecting her work. He gave a curt nod. "Thanks." It was the first non-hostile word he had spoken to her. Another morning, she remembered a conversation she'd overheard between Julian and Maya. He was trying to coax his daughter to eat her oatmeal. So, Elara made the oatmeal, but she added a sprinkle of cinnamon and arranged a smiley face on top with banana slices. She set the bowl in front of Maya. The little girl looked at the bowl, then up at Elara. A tiny, hesitant smile touched her lips. She ate every bite. These were small things, tiny bridges built across a chasm of silence and grief. One evening, Julian was late. A storm was raging outside, the wind and rain lashing against the glass walls of the house. The power flickered, casting the cavernous rooms in an eerie strobe of light and shadow. Maya was terrified. She came downstairs, her favorite stuffed bear clutched in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Elara found her huddled at the bottom of the staircase. She sat down on the steps beside her, not touching, just being present. "It's okay to be scared," Elara said softly. "The storm sounds very loud, doesn't it?" Maya nodded, burying her face in her bear. Elara started to hum. It was an old lullaby, a simple, gentle melody her mother used to sing to her. She hummed it quietly, her voice a soft counterpoint to the fury of the storm outside. Slowly, Maya's sobs subsided. She leaned her small body against Elara's arm, her breathing evening out. By the time Julian finally walked through the door, soaked and exhausted, he found them like that. Elara and Maya, asleep together on the bottom step, the storm still raging outside, but a small circle of peace created between them. He stood there for a long time, just watching. He saw not a housekeeper and his daughter. He saw a gentleness that had been missing from this house for a very, very long time. The next evening there was a knock on her bedroom door. It was Maya. She stood there, silent, holding out a piece of paper. Elara took it. It was a drawing, a picture of 4 stick figures standing under a bright yellow sun, a tall man, a small boy, a smaller girl, and next to the girl, holding her hand, was a woman with long brown hair. Above her head, Maya had written a single word, Elara. Elara's chest tightened. She knelt down to the little girl's level. "Thank you, Maya," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." Maya finally spoke to her, her voice a tiny, shy whisper. "You have a pretty voice." And then she wrapped her small arms around Elara's neck and gave her a hug. It was the first sign of trust, the first crack in the ice. And for Elara, it felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long and brutal winter. Late one night, Julian came home to a silent house. He walked through the darkened halls, the weight of his company, of his life, pressing down on him. Sleep was a luxury he rarely afforded himself, his mind always racing with strategies and projections. He passed the small guest room Elara had claimed as her own. The door was slightly ajar. He paused, intending to close it, but a sound from within stopped him. A small, choked sob. He pushed the door open a fraction more. Elara was curled up on the bed, her back to the door, her shoulders shaking with silent tears. She was asleep, trapped in a nightmare. He felt a powerful, protective urge wash over him. He wanted to wake her, to chase away the demons that haunted her sleep. But he knew it wasn't his place. He quietly closed the door, the sound of her distress echoing in his ears. He found her later, in the kitchen. She was sitting at the large island, a mug of tea cradled in her hands, her face pale in the dim light. She looked up as he entered, startled. "I'm sorry, sir. I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he said, his voice softer than he intended. He walked to the counter and poured himself a glass of water. "Me neither." They sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Bad dream?" he asked gently. She nodded, not looking at him. "They're old dreams. They don't go away." He leaned against the counter opposite her. He noticed, for the first time, a faint, silvery scar just beside her temple, almost hidden by her hairline. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. "You don't have to tell me," he said, "but this house, it's safe, Elara. Whatever happened before, it can't reach you here." His words were a key, turning a lock deep inside her. And the story, the one she had held inside for so long, began to spill out. Not all at once, but in quiet, halting fragments. She told him about Marcus, about his charm, the way he had swept her off her feet, about the slow, insidious way he had taken control. First, her friends. He'd found reasons for her to cut ties with each one. Then, her family. He'd manufactured arguments, driven wedges between her and the people who loved her. Then, her money. He'd convinced her to quit her job, to put her savings into a joint account, an account she was eventually locked out of. "He said he was protecting me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He said the world was a dangerous place, and I was too naive. I needed him." She told him about the words, the constant cutting remarks that chipped away at her confidence until there was nothing left. Stupid, ugly, worthless. And then she finally spoke of the fear, the way the air in a room would change when he was angry, the sound of his keys in the lock, a sound that could send a jolt of terror through her. She traced the rim of her mug, her finger trembling. "This," she said, gesturing vaguely to her face, "was an accident. He said. He was just angry. He didn't mean it." Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. A cold, hard rage settled in his gut. He imagined finding this man, this Marcus, and he forced himself to relax, to keep his voice even. "He left you with nothing. Less than nothing," she said with a humorless smile. "He ran up debts in my name, ruined my credit. When he left, he called my boss and told him I was a thief. I was fired the next day. The landlord evicted me a week later. I had nowhere to go." She finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You found me at the end of it," she said. "You were the first person who was kind to me in years." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Julian felt his own walls, the ones he had so carefully constructed around his heart after his wife's death, begin to crumble. He saw his own pain reflected in her eyes, his own loneliness. "My wife, Sarah," he heard himself say, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "She was sick for a long time. The children were very young." He spoke of the endless hospital visits, the hollow hope, the final, devastating silence. He told her about coming home to this big, empty house, the silence a crushing weight, about trying to be both a father and a mother to two grieving children, while his own grief was a gaping wound. "Leo was angry," he said, his voice thick. "He still is, sometimes. He thinks I should have been able to fix it, to save her, and Maya. She just stopped talking for almost a year." He looked around the pristine, perfect kitchen. "Leo was right," he said quietly. "The last housekeeper. She said this house was too sad. She was right. I filled it with things, but I couldn't fill it with life. Not until you came." He looked at Elara, truly seeing her not as a victim or an employee, but as a kindred spirit, a fellow survivor. "You're not just the housekeeper, Elara," he said. You're the one who brought the music back." In the quiet of the late-night kitchen, two broken people shared their wounds. And in that shared vulnerability, something new began to grow, a bond not of gratitude or pity, but of deep, mutual understanding, a connection that felt, to both of them, a lot like coming home. Life settled into a new rhythm, a comfortable, hopeful cadence. Elara was no longer just the housekeeper. She was part of the family's heartbeat. She helped Leo with his homework, her patience untangling the knots of his frustration with math. She spent hours with Maya in the garden, planting flowers and teaching her their names, coaxing more and more words from the quiet little girl. She and Julian continued their late-night talks, the kitchen island becoming their confessional. They spoke of futures they had thought were lost, of dreams they were tentatively beginning to have again. The sadness in the house began to recede, replaced by the sound of Maya's laughter, of Leo's enthusiastic chatter about his day. Elara started to smile again, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She was healing. They were all healing, together. But the past is never truly gone. It waits in the shadows for a moment of weakness, a crack in the light. The crack appeared in the form of a glossy magazine. Julian had attended a major charity gala, a necessary part of his role as CEO of Vance Technologies. He had almost convinced Elara to go with him, but she had shied away, not yet ready for that kind of public scrutiny. In one of the published photos, a wide shot of the ballroom, Julian was in the foreground, but in the background, just visible through an open doorway, was Elara. She was in the hallway, laughing at something Leo had just said over the phone. It was a blurry, insignificant detail to anyone else, but not to Marcus. He saw the house. He saw the wealth. He saw an opportunity. The first article appeared a week later on a notorious gossip website. The headline was Poison. Grieving billionaire Julian Vance, preyed upon by mysterious gold digger. The story was a fabrication, a twisted version of Elara's past, painting her as a manipulative schemer who had targeted a vulnerable widower. It used quotes from an anonymous source who was clearly Marcus. It mentioned her firing, her eviction, framing them as proof of her instability. It was a character assassination, brutal and efficient. Elara saw it on a tablet left on the kitchen counter. The words leaped off the screen, wrapping around her throat, stealing her breath. All the progress she had made, all the fragile confidence she had built, shattered in an instant. She was back on that cold bench at the bus station, with his voice in her ear. Worthless, stupid, a charity case. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating wave. She had brought this into his life, this ugliness, this poison. She was tainting him, his children, his reputation. She had to go. It was the only way to protect them. Her hands shaking, she ran to her room. She pulled out the small, worn bag she had arrived with. There wasn't much to pack. The gray sweatsuit. A few other items Julian had insisted on buying for her. She scribbled a note, the pen slipping in her trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry. Thank you for everything." Tears blurred the words. She had to leave before the children got home from school. She couldn't bear to see the confusion in their eyes, the questions she couldn't answer. She crept down the hall, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She was almost to the front door when it opened. Julian stood there. He took in the sight of her, her pale, tear-streaked face, the bag clutched in her hand. His expression was not one of anger or disappointment. It was one of fierce, unwavering resolve. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I have to leave," she choked out. "Julian, I can't let him do this to you. I can't bring this into your life." "You think running away is the answer?" he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him, shutting out the world. "You think I'm going to let that piece of filth chase you out of your own home?" "This isn't my home," she cried, the words tearing from her throat. "I'm the housekeeper. I'm the charity case from the bus station." "No," he said. his voice dropping, becoming gentle. He walked towards her, slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. "You are Elara. You are the woman who taught my son how to fix things, not just break them. You are the woman who gave my daughter her voice back. You are the heart that started beating in this house again." He stood in front of her now, his presence filling the space, a shield against the world. "This is your home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And anyone who tries to harm you has to go through me." He gently took the bag from her hand and let it drop to the floor. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I've already called my lawyers," he said, his eyes boring into hers. "We're not going to hide. We're not going to run. We are going to fight. I am going to use every resource, every penny I have, to expose him for the liar and the abuser that he is. I'm going to protect you, Elara. I'm going to protect our family. Our family." The words echoed in the space between them, a declaration, a promise. In that moment, he was not just a kind benefactor. He was her protector, her partner. And looking into his resolute, unwavering eyes, Elara finally understood. Running was what the old Elara would have done. But she wasn't that person anymore. This house, this man, these children, they had rebuilt her. She took a deep, shuddering breath and gave him a small, determined nod. "Okay," she whispered. "We fight." The fight was swift and decisive. Julian Vance did not move with the subtlety of a scalpel. He moved with the force of a tidal wave. His legal team, the best in the country, descended upon Marcus's life like a pack of wolves. They unearthed a history of financial fraud, of other women he had manipulated and abandoned, of a life built on lies. His PR team worked in parallel, not just issuing denials, but shaping a new narrative. They released a carefully worded statement from Julian. It didn't mention Elara by name. It simply spoke of giving a second chance to a person of incredible character who was escaping a history of domestic abuse. It condemned the tabloid for victim blaming and announced a multi-million-dollar donation to a national network of women's shelters. He turned their poison into a platform. The public narrative shifted almost overnight. The gossip site was forced to retract its story under threat of a massive lawsuit. Marcus, exposed and facing legal charges from multiple fronts, disappeared from the public eye, his pathetic attempt at extortion backfiring spectacularly. Elara was shielded from the worst of it. Julian created a bubble of safety around her and the children, but she wasn't passive in her own rescue. Her victory came not in a courtroom, but in a quiet office with one of Julian's lawyers. She gave a formal statement, her voice clear and steady, detailing Marcus's abuse. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, and the most freeing. She walked out of that office feeling taller, lighter. The ghost of Marcus, the one that had haunted her for so long, had finally been vanquished. She was free. With the external threat gone, the quiet truth of their lives could finally come into focus. The pretense of employer and housekeeper had long since evaporated. They were a family in everything but name. One sunny Saturday afternoon, they were all in the garden. Julian was pushing Maya on the swing, her laughter pealing through the air. Elara was sitting on a blanket with Leo, helping him sketch the rose bushes. It was a perfect, ordinary moment. And in its perfection, Julian saw his future with blinding clarity. He stopped the swing and knelt in front of Maya. "Maya Bear," he said softly, How would you feel if Elara stayed with us forever?" Maya's face lit up. "Like a real mom?" "Yes," Julian said, his heart swelling. "Like a real mom." He looked over at Leo, who had stopped sketching and was watching them, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Leo, what do you think?" Leo put down his sketchbook and walked over. He looked at Elara, then at his dad. "It's better when she's here," he said, a simple, profound truth. "The house isn't sad anymore." That was all Julian needed. He walked over to the blanket where Elara was sitting, her heart hammering in her chest. He knelt in the grass in front of her. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a prepared speech. He just had the truth. "Elara," he began, his voice thick with an emotion that was too big for the garden, for the world. "I found you when you were broken, but the truth is, I was broken too. This whole house was. You came in and you didn't just clean the rooms. You healed them. You healed us." He took her hand. "I love you. I love the strength and the kindness and the quiet courage of you. I can't imagine this house or my life without you in it." From behind him, Leo stepped forward. He was holding a small velvet box. Julian hadn't seen him retrieve it from the house. Julian took the box, his eyes never leaving Elara's. "The kids and I talked about it," he said with a small smile. "They helped me pick it out." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, clear diamond that shone like a captured star. "Elara," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "will you marry me? Will you make our family whole?" Tears were streaming down her face, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked from Julian's hopeful face to the eager, loving faces of his children, her family, her future, her home. "Yes," she breathed, the word a prayer, a promise, a song. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. And as he leaned in to kiss her, Maya and Leo cheered, their happy shouts the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The wedding was not a grand affair. It took place right there, in the garden where he had proposed, under a simple archway of white roses. The guests were few, a handful of close friends, Julian's parents, and the children. Elara wore a simple white dress. She didn't feel the need for extravagance. The joy she felt was more adornment than any jewel. Leo stood beside his father as the best man, wearing a miniature version of Julian's suit, his face beaming with pride. Maya was the flower girl, scattering rose petals down the grassy aisle. Tucked into the ribbon around her small bouquet was the drawing she had given Elara. Her first gift, her first sign of acceptance. When Elara walked down the aisle, she wasn't walking towards a man who had rescued her. She was walking towards her partner, her equal. They exchanged vows. They had written themselves simple words that spoke of shared wounds and mutual healing, of finding light in the darkest of places. When Julian slid the wedding band onto her finger, next to the engagement ring, Elara looked down at her hand. This hand had once trembled with fear. It had scrubbed floors and packed a bag in desperation. Now it was the hand of a wife, a mother, a woman who was no longer broken, but whole. After the ceremony, there was no lavish reception, just a simple meal in the garden as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Leo presented Elara with a small, wrapped box. Inside was the little toy soldier, its arm perfectly mended, now glued to a new, solid base. "So he'll never break again," Leo explained seriously. Elara hugged him tightly, her heart overflowing. Later, as dusk settled and the fairy lights they had strung in the trees began to glow, they sat together on a large blanket on the lawn. Maya snuggled into Elara's side, her head resting on Elara's shoulder, already half asleep. Leo sat on Julian's other side, leaning against his father, pointing out the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Julian wrapped his arm around Elara, pulling her close. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. She looked at the magnificent house, no longer a sterile monument of glass and steel, but a home filled with warmth and laughter and love. She looked at the faces of the children, her children, their faces soft and peaceful in the fading light. She looked at the man beside her, her husband, his eyes full of a love so deep and profound it felt like the safest harbor in the world. She had come to this place with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of scars. She had been a ghost, a survivor, a victim. But now, in the quiet peace of this perfect, ordinary moment, she was none of those things. She was loved, she was home, and she was finally, completely and irrevocably happy.